I had a government traineeship for giving speech pathology or speech therapy to veterans at the Veterans Hospital in Washington, D.C. It was during the time of Kennedy's tenure. Mm-hmm. It was 1962, and I started noticing the Kennedys when I was in school in Boston.
Right, right.
And I was about 19 when I was a junior in college. And so I kept paying attention to the politics, in Boston, which were really interesting. And I started noticing this young guy, and I thought he was really something. And so I always sort of had a crush on him.
Sure.
And so I was delighted that I was going to get to live in Washington a little while. My mother babysat for my son. He was at that time older. And they were going to have a ceremony where President Kennedy places the wreath on the tomb of the unknown.
Right, right.
And that was in November of 1962. And I decided I was going to take off from work and go see him, And I did. And
did you actually get to meet the president?
No. I should have, because at that time I noticed that the security was quite lax.
Right.
I noticed that.
Different.
And I remember his face was very sunburned. His hair was very, very blonde. I think they had been in Florida, and his hair had gotten real blonde. And I always looked at men's shoes, and I wanted to see if men shine their shoes or things like that. So I looked at his shoes, and I noticed that his feet were very long and narrow. I just noticed these crazy things, And it was a rather cool day and kind of misty, but he didn't even have on a coat. He just had on a suit jacket, And little John was with him, and John was prancing in front of him, and he was just paying attention to his son. And I remember one of the generals was on his right, and for years I remembered the general's name, and now I don't remember it. And then some other generals who I wasn't familiar with, or officers, were on his left, and he placed the wreath on the tomb, and then the crowd, there wasn't a big crowd,
right.
Large crowd, but he was to give a speech in an amphitheater next to this
right.
ceremony. And I didn't listen to the whole speech. I think it began to rain a little bit. It began to get kind of cold, too. So then I left. But I do remember that. And then I was in Washington 10 days later, of course, and I was at the funeral. And I saw John come out with his mother and sister, and I saw Jacqueline Kennedy give John a little signal to salute.
Wow. Right.
And I saw that.
Yeah. This was 1963. I think you had mentioned 62, but it was November of 63.
Was it 63?
Yeah.
Well, that's when it was.